Are you looking for an experience that will grow your teenagers' faith, increase their leadership skills, and teach them the discernment to engage with the world all around them, all while taking them on the adventure of a lifetime? I mean, who isn't looking for that? If your teenager loves fun, adventure, and wants to grow in their faith and leadership this summer, then send them to Excel's Summer Leadership Camp. Excel's Summer Leadership Camp is a 12-day experience for passionate young leaders looking to discover God's truth, to discern wisely, and live wholeheartedly. Your teenager will embark on a transformative journey in the Blue Ridge Mountains, where they'll build lasting friendships in the context of community, embark on thrilling adventures like camping, rock climbing, whitewater rafting, and they will receive expert training and certifications in categories like CPR and wilderness first aid. Each aspect of the camp is woven together to help them learn to discover truth, to discern wisely, and take godly action in the context of real-life situations. To learn more or begin an application, go to theexcelcamp.org. That's theexcelcamp.org. Hurry, because summer is just around the corner.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Reclamation Podcast, where our goal is to help you reclaim good practices for faith and life. My name is Tony, and I'm your host. Today is episode 143 of the podcast, where I sit down with Bill McKendry. Now, Bill is a nonprofit leader, he's a marketing agent, executive, and he's a Jesus follower. I love Bill's approach to sneaky Jesus in the workplace and creating an advertising agency that serves Jesus. If you find yourself in the workplace, I think you're going to love this conversation with Bill. And remember, we believe that through intentional conversation, we can help you, our listener, unpack a deeper relationship with God. So hey, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to podcasts, share this episode with a friend, and maybe leave a rating or review. I think you're going to love what Bill has to offer. He's got an incredible story from birth till now. He has built the kingdom of God everywhere he went. There's some really good stuff. Be sure to grab a pen and paper. You're going to need it. Now, without any further ado, here's my conversation with Bill McKendry. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm excited today to have a nonprofit leader and kind of advertising agency extraordinaire, Bill McKendry, with us. Bill, thank you so much for jumping on the podcast today.
It's awesome to be with you today. Appreciate it.
So, Bill, we're going to talk about your latest resource and kind of what's kind of become a mission statement for you, which is do more good. And as I was perusing all of your material and getting to learn your story a little bit more, what's the genesis for this movement? And is it any coincidence that you're pushing this at a time when it feels like the country's never been so divided?
Yeah, it's I started on this journey, actually. I created the term "do more good" in 1999, and I actually trademarked it then. And it really, I was surprised that I could trademark it, right?
Right.
Literally, when I plugged in the words into the trademark office website and said, hey, does anybody else own these words, and this phrase? And it came back that nobody did. And I was like, how's that possible? So I really felt like God created a platform for me, right? But it actually started 5 years previous to that. In 1994, I actually started an advertising agency. I had worked at a big advertising agency that was based in New York, and I worked in their Denver office, right? And so I worked on things like American Express and Dodge and Taco Bell and Kohler. And interestingly enough, there was a gentleman that worked across the street from me in Denver, a guy named Jim Hainan, that I wouldn't end up meeting till I moved back to Michigan. And again, and we knew of each other in Denver, but we didn't really know each other, right? We worked at competing ad agencies. And then I moved back to Michigan, and his career takes him on to Chicago, and he ends up working with Leo Burnett in Chicago. And Leo Burnett is one of the biggest advertising agencies in the world, and Jim's career took him to the top of that agency. And he did really phenomenal work for like McDonald's, for example. And
Oh, wow.
it's 6 years worth of Super Bowl ads for McDonald's, which one is still ranked as one of the top 3 Super Bowl ads in the history of Super Bowl advertising. That was the one with Michael Jordan and Larry Bird. I don't know if you ever saw.
Oh, yeah,
that.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, nothing but
Yeah.
net. Name of that commercial, and that was Jim's commercial, right? And so I ended up reconnecting with Jim and taking him on as my partner in Michigan. I lured him away from Leo Burnett, and but where the conversation really started, and I'll get to how this gets to do more good. Where the conversation really started is we were both 33 years old at the time, and we both had already achieved success by that time. We both had, when we looked at our careers, and if you looked and examined our careers from an award standpoint, from a money standpoint, from a prestige standpoint, by 33, we both had already experienced a great amount of success. Yet we were sitting together, and we were talking about our careers and where we were going to go, and we were both not satisfied. There was something gnawing away at us, and the conversation started. Quite honestly, is I had landed a client that was based in Tucson, Arizona, and that client had their own bowl game. For example, they're called Weiserlock, and they had a Weiserlock Copper Bowl in Tucson, Arizona.
Oh, wow.
And for a little agency in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is where I relocated after Colorado. That was a big deal, and Jim was asking me. He says, "Well, how can you not be satisfied? You left the big agency world, you started your own little agency, and you landed a pretty good sized client. And how can you not be happy?" And I looked at him and I said, Weiserlock makes, just so you have a frame of reference, they make doorknobs and handle sets that you can buy at Home Depot and Lowe's, right? And I looked at Jim. I looked at Jim and I said, we've both done a lot of really great things in our career, right? But where I'm at right now is I'm afraid that someday I'm going to die, and on my tombstone it's going to say, Bill McKendry is one of the world's greatest marketers of doorknobs and handle sets, maybe the best in the entire history of that category. And I go, I don't want to die with that on my gravestone. Interestingly, at that point, Jim and I had known each other for a long time. But we didn't know, like in the big advertising world, it's a lot like Hollywood. You don't talk about politics. You don't talk about your religion. And Jim said to me, he said, "Bill, we've known each other a long time, but I've never asked you this question. Are you a Christian?" I said, "Yes, I am." I said, "Jim, I am a Christian. Are you a Christian?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "I'm a Christian too." He said, "I think what's gnawing at you right now is, did God make us to sell credit cards, hamburgers, tacos, cars, toilets, you name it, doorknobs, handle sets? Is that the reason why he gave us these skills? Or did he give us these skills to do something different?" We started a lunch conversation, and the lunch conversation was simply to talk about doing some work together. But Jim asked me this question during that lunch conversation. He said, "What kind of agency, if we could just theoretically talk about something, what kind of agency would Jesus want us to work at?"
Wow.
It started as a lunch conversation that went till 4:00 in the morning the next day. And we actually literally mapped
4:00 in the morning?
4:00 in the morning the next day. And we mapped out what we felt like was, an advertising agency that would serve Jesus. And we said, the voice of faith, the voice of human kindness, the voice of charity in our culture is not competing well. How would we help that? What would we do to help nonprofit organizations, and specifically faith-based ministries, to compete better in the marketplace? So we started an ad agency in 1994 based in Grand Rapids. We eventually had opened an office in Colorado Springs later called McKendry. And we set about using our skills that we had learned working with some of the world's best marketers and said, how can we apply this to places that really matter, to places that really make a difference, to more meaningful work? So in 1999, 5 years later, the American Advertising Federation recognized me as the person doing the best cause marketing work in the country. They brought me to New York City.
Oh, wow.
And they gave me their top award for doing cause marketing. I had to give a speech. And the president of the American Advertising Federation approached me after that speech, and he said, you've got to go on tour. You've got to share your knowledge with nonprofit organizations and faith-based organizations, what you know, and how they can really compete in this world, and what they really need to do in order to really capture our country's imagination again and their hearts, right? And so when they asked me to do that, I said, sure, I would do it. But at that point, I really wasn't a public speaker. And so I sought some counsel and stuff like that. And everybody said, you got to have a handle. And so I come up with the handle, Do More Good. I go to the trademark office and I'm able to register it. And so Do More Good is really rooted in our beliefs and my beliefs in that God gave me a gift of being able to speak persuasively, to communicate effectively, and to be able to be a translator of dreams, right? I always say I'm like Joseph from the Bible, right? I'm a translator of dreams and a trusted advisor. And so my job is to work with nonprofit organizations and faith-based organizations and help them communicate to a market that is fiercely competitive with a consumeristic, materialistic world.
Yeah. I love that. And what I like about Do More Good as it pertains to kind of your brand is that it's not just do more good like you're trying to do more good, but you're trying to help these nonprofits do more good with the tools that you're giving them. So you're, in the Army, we used to call it a force multiplier, right? You're a catalyst in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it isn't until you like really meet with nonprofit executives and leaders of faith-based ministries do you really wake them up to the competitive forces that they're against, right? And when you really sit with them and you realize, what do you need in order for your organization to grow and be successful, right? Typically, they need people's awareness, they need people's time, and they need people's money. Some combination of those things, probably all of them, right? And so when you really break it down, they're in the business of competing for discretionary time and money. And then I remind them, your competition, even though nonprofit organizations and faith-based organizations never like to talk about competition, your competition is fierce for those things. And they go, yeah, there's a whole bunch of nonprofits and organizations out there. I go, no. Apple, Budweiser, Pepsi, Harley Davidson, Nike, that's your competition. And if you want to stand out in this marketplace, if you're sitting here and you're wondering why has this country gone to be such a nation of consumers rather than a nation of citizens, why have we gone so far down the materialistic path? It's because those guys are really good and you guys are not at communicating.
So prior to the work I do here with Spirit and Truth, which is a nonprofit that walks alongside churches, I was a local pastor for 10 years. Yeah. And one of the things that I really believe is that the local church has a huge marketing problem because we have the best story in the world and no succinct way to say it. So I'm going to put you in a make-believe position. You have now just been promoted to marketing for the global, or let's just say the North American church. What's the one thing that you're going to get all of these organizations to? I mean, how do we sell it better, Bill? Like, fix us, make us get this out, this word that's life-giving and important out to the masses. How do we do it first?
Yeah, so I I'm dealing with some secret ammunition that you don't know about. You didn't even know about before we got into this interview, right? So when you ask that question, I'm gonna go off completely off script from Do More Good and tell you I'm already doing that right now. And that's
really?
because, yeah, and our problems are actually worse than what you just said. So I was approached by a group of very successful individuals who are Christians, who are concerned about exactly what you're talking about, the church and Christianity and the state of Christianity. And they came to realize that not only have we been seeing trends going the wrong way for the church, right, and Christianity, but the reality is according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, we're a hate group. And you say, how can that be, right? And who is the Southern Poverty Law Center? First of all, I don't want to trash the Southern Poverty Law Center. They've actually done a lot of fantastic things, especially on the topic of racism in this country over the years, right?
Sure.
But for whatever reason, they have become the arbiter in this country of who is a hate group. And if you go to the Southern Poverty Law Center right now and go to their hate group website, and they'll have all mapped out who are the hate groups in the United States. And you're going to see a list that starts with neo-Nazis, white supremacists, the KKK, and then Christian identity, the Catholic Church, right?
Wow.
And the problem is the Southern Poverty Law Center is now become the standard for Facebook, Instagram, New York Times, Washington Post, all major media, all major academia on who is a hate group and who isn't. And they're labeling Christian groups like Focus on the Family, like Alliance Defending Freedom. They're labeling them as hate groups because of their stances on same-sex marriage and abortion.
Wow.
And so I was presented with a problem statement by a group of very wealthy Christian donors saying, we got to do something. We got to shape our culture for Christ. There needs to be a new awakening, and we've got to do something. We have to do something now, because they were disturbed when they saw this. And the problem statement that they presented to me at that time was, how did the world's greatest love story become known as a hate group? How did that happen?
Yeah.
Right? So this is how I approach things. I mean, it's like, okay, you got to tell me the problem statement, and you got to tell me what it is that we need to overcome. And then I'm going to figure out, if you want to communicate, which I believe is one of the most powerful vehicles in today's culture, then we need to figure out a way to communicate and differentiate and get through to people what our message is really all about. We did 6 months of research. And, I'm here to tell you, if I'm the brand marketer of the Christian brand, right? Number one, the thing that we found in this national survey, and this is a 5,000 person survey, voter ID matched, right? We know that basically, even though we didn't talk to everybody in America, we basically talked to everybody in America, right? Every group, every ideology, everything was represented, right? And what was amazing about this research was we found out that Jesus is not the problem. Christianity, and the church have a brand problem. Jesus has no brand problem.
Yeah, amen to that.
Not even.
No, everybody understands Jesus.
Right?
Yeah.
So, based on that, we started doing all kinds of research, too, about messaging surrounding Jesus, right? But one of the things that we did is when we did this survey, if you took this survey, you would not know that you were being asked by a Christian organization, because we asked all kinds of questions about all kinds of people, including religious figures. We asked questions about Muhammad. We asked questions about Buddha. We asked questions about Gandhi. We asked questions about Jesus, right? And what's interesting is, for people who reject religion or just don't admit that they're religious, we divided people into basically 4 groups at the end of this. And we said there are engaged Christians. Those are about 30% of America. There's cultural Christians who are just as big. Another 30% of America are cultural Christians. And those are people who maybe, would self-identify as a Christian, were born into a Christian family, maybe go to church once or twice a year, but they don't tell their friends that they're Christians. And they got some issues with the divinity of Christ. They're not fully bought in on all that, right? But they think they're Christians, but they don't really tell other people they're Christians because they're kind of embarrassed of Christians. But then we have this group of skeptics. We have skeptics, which are 24% of America. And then we have, this non-believer off the rails, 18% of America, or 16% of America that, you just can't convince. They're science only or proof only type of people. But what was really interesting, one thing that we really found from research was when we asked people, what is it that, like, for example, what is religion really all about? And people say it's about being a good person, right? It's about learning to be a good person. And there's so many people that say, as a result, I don't need religion. I know what is a good person. And so I'm just going to be focused on being a good person. And so we said, all right, across all belief spectrum, can you guys describe for us what is a good person? The top 4 answers across the board, this is including atheists, top 4 answers were peacekeeper, approachable, compassionate, and loving all. Then we said, all right, so let's go back through these religious figures. Can you tell me what's good about these people? Tell us what's good about Muhammad. Tell us what's good about Buddha. Tell us what's good about Jesus. Tell us what's good about Gandhi, right? Guess what? Of all the religious figures that we question people about, the only one and one only, matched the top 4 answers exactly. Jesus. So in same order, people ranked Jesus was a peace seeker. He was approachable. He was compassionate, and he loved all. Guess what? Evidence number 1, Jesus is written on everybody's hearts, whether they want to admit it or not, right?
Wow.
So then we went and we've created a campaign, and you can look up this campaign. We've just got done testing it in 10 markets. The campaign is called He Gets Us. And you can look at the website hegetsus.com, but I would encourage you to go to the YouTube channel for He Gets Us and watch the videos and the TV commercials that we put together on this campaign. This campaign just got done running 5 weeks in 10 markets, almost 30 million views of our work on YouTube, targeting skeptics.
Wow.
And the responses have been phenomenal. The number 1 complaint that we get from people is actually from Christians because they don't understand the language that we're using, right? The language we're using is outside of the language that they're used to using. And they're having a hard time lining up the biblical stories with the story that we have. There's an ad called Teen Mom, and it's basically the story of Jesus's birth, right? And Mary and Joseph and what they went through. But it's told in very, very, very contemporary language with imagery, black and white still photography, journalistic type quality, just gorgeous photography, but raw and real and authentic, right? And when you get done watching the commercials, the skeptics are going, wow, Jesus was born to a teen mom. Jesus did face a lot of the same things that we face. He was challenged by many of the things that we're challenged by. That he was fully human.
Hmm.
He gets us. And it's really just an entree. What we found is if you can create an entree for people to raise their hand and say, I want to learn more about Jesus, and you provide them with content, we found that over 60% of skeptics want to learn more about Jesus when you allow them to explore that on their own. But then also give them outlets for, okay, now I'm ready to talk to somebody. And to answer your question, we've already started this process. And
let me drill down on that a little bit, because
yeah,
I think you brought up a really interesting point, which is it feels like the existing Christian culture is what's preventing us from changing the brand. Now, you've done so much marketing in your career. I mean, this has to be a pretty common thing, right? Like, you go into an organization that feels like it's been super successful, that's maybe stand, since the beginning of time, and all of a sudden they don't want to change or hold on to what they've or get rid of what they've always known. So as you're walking with churches, clients, whoever, through the idea of changing their brand in order to reach those that aren't yet here, or to gain the next part of the market share, or however you want to say it, how do you teach people to be okay with change?
Yeah, that's I love that question, because it reminds me of it was a Harvard Business Review story about second generation businesses and their high degree of failure rate. And it was like, why do second generation businesses, like, if they can make it, usually if they can make it to the third generation, things get cleaned up and they're able to sustain and move on. But for whatever reason, there's a high failure rate as a first generation passes to a second generation on a business, right? It's like most vulnerable time in a business besides the starting period. So they actually commissioned a study on second generation businesses, and they had some assumptions going in that maybe the second generation is just a little lazier than the first generation. They aren't go getters, right? They aren't driven like the first generation was, and as a result, second generation kids just couldn't handle it, right? And as a result, the business fails. That was the assumption going in. That's all the things that you would think of, right? What they found out instead, though, what they got in was the second generation was more driven, worked more hours, was more committed, and yet the failure rate was high. What they found was the reason why they become more successful in the third generation rather than the second generation is because the second generation is still trying to repeat a lot of the same things that the first generation did. And so rather than innovate and become new and renewed, they just try to do the same thing as the first generation, but harder. They worked harder. And so Harvard Business Story Review at the end said, what we learned is old ways harder don't work. And I feel like that's the case here. Is our culture is changing, right? It's constantly changing. I mean, you look at the introduction of social media alone. I look at it with my own kids, for example. It's like, I did not grow up with that kind of pressure. I graduated from, before social media came back into existence, I graduated in high school in 1980, and there were people I never saw until Facebook started again, right? And it's like, had Facebook not started, I probably wouldn't see those people the rest of my life, right? But instead, you got all this constant comparison that's going on, and the pressures of social media. This world is evolving and changing all the time, and the pressures are changing. The truth is the truth. The truth is not going to change, right? I mean, Jesus's message is true no matter what. But how we apply that and how we talk about it and how we use it can't be the old ways harder. It has to be, we have to think of new language. I sat with a group of extremely influential, is considered to be the top 25 young voices in Christianity today. I went to this private gathering, and before we even started this campaign, I wanted to hear from them. And you can't believe how many of them looked at me as successful as, I mean, these are people that have millions of followers already themselves. And they looked at me and they said, I don't know what's going on, but we need new language. We just don't have it anymore. You know, the ways that we've been talking about Christians and Christianity in this country just aren't working like they used to. We need new methods and new practices. That's what this, quite honestly, that's what we're doing right now, is we're creating new ways to communicate, because guess what? There's new frontiers that people are facing.
Hey friends, just interrupting this conversation with Bill to remind you about the Spirit and Truth Conference. You guys know as well as I do that this is such an important time in the life of the church. And we want to help you, the church leader, the church attender, the church member, grow in your relationship with Christ. And we are offering a one-in-a-lifetime chance to do it here March 17th through the 19th, Dayton, Ohio, Stillwater Church, the Spirit and Truth Conference. And for you, our family here at the podcast, we have a discount code. So when you go to spiritandtruth.life, and register, put in the code reclamation for a discount on your registration fee. We'd love to offer that to you. And we think it's going to be so much fun. I can't wait to see you guys there. I'll be hosting. I'll be there with all my friends, and I can't wait to connect. Now, let's finish up this conversation with Bill.
So I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this, about the prospect of change, right? I've long believed that change is like a muscle, and you have to keep working it in order to use it. If you don't use it, the muscle atrophies and it eventually grows weak. And so, I think it's safe to say, without being offensive here, Bill, that you're in a later season of life than I am.
Yep.
Right? You told me before we recorded you've been married for 38 years. And when I was in the local church, what I always heard is that more seasoned individuals, some might say old, I wouldn't say old, I don't like that word, but more seasoned individuals struggle with change. Is that real, or do we just get lazy in the muscle? What do you think?
I think it's a combination of both. I think, when you're not constantly changing, when you're not trying to keep up, you suffer from atrophy, right? And as a result, you just don't have the strength to change. But I've always believed in myself as, I'm a lifelong learner. I believe that's how I stay young in my mind, is saying, if I don't learn something today, man, that was a wasted day. And so I want to keep my mind fresh. I want to keep open to change. And this world is constantly evolving and changing. I happen to be in a business that demands that you stay current, right? And stay on top of change and really understand what's going on and be comfortable with it. We were just talking this morning, we've had issues with actually advertising on Instagram and Facebook with this campaign. And Facebook has been giving us a hard time, and we're still not approved on this campaign. And we tried for 5 weeks to get approval to run on Facebook. And, they don't give us a straight answer, but then, I was asked this morning, it's like, well, what if eventually we can't advertise on Facebook and Instagram? I go, no worry. It's like, Snapchat and TikTok and other vehicles are taking their place. Quite honestly, we may not even want to advertise on Facebook and Instagram in not too long a time, because that's for old people, right? Where we want to be is in this new mediums, right? So I think you have to force yourself to be able to change, right? And I look at Jesus and his history of how he was a communicator, and I have to be honest that everything I understood from a marketing standpoint, when it comes to how Jesus spoke, is exactly what I was taught as a marketer, how to speak, right? So he started with people's conditions, right? He never started with what he wanted to tell them. He started with where they were at. Then he spoke to their condition, right? He spoke to their condition. He modified his language so that they would understand him. His stories were adapted to their lives. He told farmer stories. He told fisherman stories, right? He told, soldier stories, right? He adapted his storytelling and his parables to those people. He didn't demand that they come to his level and his experience and his understanding. He came down to them. And that's a lesson, I think, for all of us of why we have to constantly be learning and changing and understanding. The truth is the truth, and it's universal. It's gonna, the power of the truth is never going to change. How we communicate it, we need to be like Jesus. We need to be willing to bring it to the people in a way that they'll understand it and feel it and grasp it on their own, so that it has an impact on them, like Jesus had an impact on them. Right? He modeled for us everything about what we're supposed to do.
Yeah, one of the things that's interesting about your story, and you're very open about, is the reality that you were born to two deaf parents.
Yeah.
And so you spent the majority of your adolescence, childhood and adolescence, translating for them. And I'm wondering, what did you learn about yourself and about God, of course, in hindsight, translating for your parents for 20 years.
Yeah. I was a oops baby, right? So I was like the closest sibling to me was 7 years older. And I used to, tell my parents, it's like, you just ran out of kids and you needed another translator. So you guys had another kid. I mean, that's, so they laughed. I mean, my parents had a great sense of humor. But yeah, so I was born into a family where, sign language was my first language. And, I had to translate for my parents from an early age. And you tell people, I was doing car deals when I was like 6 years old. I was helping them renegotiate their mortgage, before I was 10 years old, and, I was calling in sick for them, knowing that they weren't even sick some days, and, being faced with, those kinds of dilemmas. Right. And I, for whatever reason, I think one of my most memorable times of translating is my mom got in a car accident, and she had to go in to the emergency room and had to have her lips sewed back on, and they had no translator for her, and so I got a call at home. So here I'm 16 years old. I got to go into the emergency room and translate to my mom live during surgery. I don't like hospitals. I don't like blood, right? But I have to. But you just click into another mode, right? And it's like I have to translate for my mom so that she understands what's going on during this surgery, right? So, I feel all of that. I used to be kind of, when you look at it, you go, why did God burden me with that? Having to be a translator for my parents, right? Where I got to see other kids that didn't have to go through all of that. And so there are times maybe where you felt sorry for yourself. Today, I feel so blessed that I had that opportunity. That I had that opportunity to learn things the way I learned them. But and as a result, it's made me the person I am today. I'm a translator, right? And so I have to translate what people want to say to the market in a way that the market wants to understand it. The same thing had to happen when I was young. I mean, what people don't understand about sign language is when you get into sign language, you realize everybody also automatically assumes it's the English language in sign, but it's not. It's really a different language, and
Wow.
and the syntax is completely different, and so you have to constantly be translating, from the sentence-based world that you live in as a hearing person to a sign-based world, which is extremely noun-driven, and you got to get to the point. Like if I say in normal life, hey, I need you to run over there and get me that right now. That's how you would say it, right? In sign language, is like,
Sure.
Now you go, and it's just, it's you just cut out all the words and get right straight to it. And so being a translator for people, for my mom and my dad, has helped me. It's been a gift. It's been a gift. And I think many people, if you really look at the experiences in your life and you ask yourself, why would God put you through that? And I realized that God was preparing me exactly for what he was preparing me for. This campaign that I got done talking to you about, the most interesting aspect of this campaign is when I got the call back in March originally to think about this and how to go to market about this. I asked the person who called me on this, I go, can I use the working title Campaign for Christ while we work on this? And the person said, sure, call whatever you want, I go, good. He goes, why do you ask? I said, because I've had that written on my to-do list for 15 years. I don't know fully why.
Wow.
I had it placed on my heart 15 years ago that I need to be a part of doing a campaign for Christ. And I said, what you just called me today to do is something I feel like I've been prepared my entire life to do. And so from a translator to working in the field the way that I've worked to getting to this point, having all the experiences that I've worked with over 300 nonprofit organizations, most of them faith-based organizations. And I've spoken to over 200 groups on nonprofit marketing and branding, and then to finally arrive at this place where I'm ready exactly at the time that God wants me to be ready to be able to do this campaign. I don't know how you even explain that other than it's God.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. In your book, Do More Good, you kind of you talk about this work that you've done with nonprofits over the years. I guess it almost feels like nonprofits really struggle with either the message or the language, or maybe it is a language barrier. Why are for-profit companies so good at getting their message out, and nonprofit companies seem to struggle in the mud and the muck of it all?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really core that's taught, like in business school, for example, is risk and reward, right? And so, you're taught. I went to business school. Even though I have an advertising degree, I got a scholarship to go to the University of Denver, and because I was a poor kid, and but then they forced me to get a marketing degree through the business school. Again, wasn't my design. But I was forced to do it. And to this day, I could tell you, gosh, I'm so glad I was forced to do that. But in business school, they're very good about risk and reward. I mean, you just got to get comfortable with risk. And you have to realize you're not always going to be successful. And that's where you come, a lot of business people have this mindset of, they don't live in a win-lose environment. They live in a win-learn environment. And when you don't win, you learn. And you learn how to do it even better. Now, this campaign that I just got done talking to you about, the He Gets Us campaign, was funded by business people, Christian business people.
Sure.
I didn't want to run the test campaign as early as we did. But I was told by a very successful business person, Bill, go, spend the money and learn, so that when we go national, you figured this out, so we're going to be more successful, right? That's a business mentality, right? Unfortunately, I think the nonprofit world lives in a scarcity mentality rather than an abundance mentality. And so as a result, they're risk adverse. I mean, that's the only thing I can really chalk it up to, is they don't see as win and learn. They see as win and lose. And if they lose, the costs are too great. They have to explain that to their donor base. They don't understand that sometimes when you take a risk, you're going to lose. They can't explain that. They always want to err then on the side of being conservative in their choices, conservative in their efforts. And as a result, they don't really achieve the big strides and success that you see that the business world is able to do. Now, there are exceptions. I mean, you look at the history of people like Martin Luther King and Billy Graham and stuff like that, and you go, those people were risk takers, right? Huge risk takers. Yeah. And as a result, that's why they achieve the impact that they achieve. But then, as I look at so many nonprofit organizations and so many nonprofit leaders, they're so afraid of taking risks that it actually stifles growth.
So let's talk a bit about the risk of putting your story down on paper and sending it out to the world, right? That do more good. What is your a year from now, right? What are we celebrating that God did with this piece of writing? Like, what's your end game with this book?
Well, interestingly enough, this is where that campaign, that He Gets Us campaign, and the book actually connect. The book is set up in using a proprietary process that I've learned from the world's greatest marketers, but have packaged it in such a way that's easy to follow for a nonprofit organization, right? And that is, there is a process for achieving success in the marketplace, and especially when you're communicating about and wanting to grow your success in a marketplace. And it's the ideas process is the acronym that I use. And it's about getting the insights that you need in order to put together messaging and direction that you need to do, right? So you need to do your homework. You need to do your research. You really need to do some fact finding. You need to talk to people. Really need to look at the marketplace. You need to look at the landscape of things. And so what I encourage nonprofit organizations to do is do your homework. Gather as many insights as you possibly can. And I give in the book, I give nonprofit organizations all kinds of tools and techniques on how to gather insights. But then from that point, you're going to have to develop a strategy and a direction. And that includes, some tactics, including how are you going to accomplish this? What is your strategy? How are you going to take this to market? And so that's the D in ideas. So you need to develop direction. But then you're going to have to explore different ways to express yourself in the marketplace. And I always encourage, like when we did this campaign, I ran this campaign and I own an advertising agency. And it would be very tempting for me to say, me and my advertising agency are going to do this campaign. But what I told this group of investors in this particular assignment, I go, you want to impact culture for Christ? Let's talk to the agencies that are impacting culture already. Let's talk to the agencies that are doing Nike work. Let's talk to the agency that's doing Gatorade work. Let's talk to the agencies that are doing, Budweiser and stuff like that, and see if they'll pitch this work. Client thought, the group of investors thought I was crazy. They go, well, if you can find Christians at these agencies, then we're willing. I got 5 agencies to pitch.
Wow.
And so I asked each one of them to bring 3 ideas to the table. So we ended up, looking at 15 phenomenal ideas from these agencies. And we ended up selecting one. And they all went after this work really hard because, number one, we were spending a lot of money. But number 2, it was meaningful to them. I found within these organizations and in leadership in these organizations that there are Christians in these organizations. Every one of these agencies that I asked to pitch not only agreed to pitch, they told me this was an assignment they were waiting their whole life to work on.
Wow.
Right? And so,
Won't he do it?
Yeah. So when it came to expression, we explored every possible way to express this, and we chose, and because we were given so many excellent examples, we chose what we consider to be the most powerful one, right? And then it moves to action. How are we going to take this to market? What are we going to learn? But then the last one is success. And you always need to say to yourself before you get started on any initiative, how are we going to define success? And then you have to be ready to measure that at the end. And then you need to ask yourself some pretty hard questions when you get to the end of that process and say, okay, we did all this stuff. Did we achieve success? And if we did, how did we do it best? If we didn't, where did we fail? And no matter what, even if you did or you don't achieve success, there's always things that you can do better. Or there's things that you can do differently. And then you get back to that at the beginning of the process. Those insights create new direction, which create new expression. And you've got to constantly be improving yourself and how you communicate to the marketplace. And so that's the process in which, things come together. I can tell you, I've been working with the ideas process for over 30 years, right? this campaign for the nonprofit community or the faith-based community is the first time it was done at such a level of excellence that I would expect out of Nike, McDonald's, and Apple.
Wow.
So while I've done
And
it
that's
for
an
many,
incredible tease.
there's always compromises. There were always compromises, like, well, we don't want to spend that much, or we don't want to do that, or there were absolutely no compromises made here. And what I can tell you from the 10 market test already is to say, when I tell you 30 million YouTube views of our work, we only expose this work to 10% of America.
Wow.
So if we actually advertise this to America, our results will be 10 times that.
That's incredible.
Right? And so that's where the two come together. I've been working ideas for a long time, but convincing the nonprofit and faith-based community that you really need to do it at the level that business does it. This is the first time in my career that it's been done to perfection.
Oh, I love God's timing in all of it, right? It's a perfect it's the perfect intersection, and I think it's exciting to hear about, and it's exciting to see, and I can't wait for nonprofits to get this book in their hands, and I can't wait for America to see this campaign, because it sounds like it's just going to be an absolute home run. Now I know my listeners are going to want to connect with you. I've got one more question for you, but before I ask it, where's the best place all over the interwebs to learn about Do More Good, to connect to your nonprofit kind of resource? Because you got tons of resources out there, so many free resources for nonprofits. If you are connected to a nonprofit, if you've got a church, and you have the ability to share information with your pastor, I'm telling you that this information is so good out here on the interwebs. Where's the best starting place, Bill?
Yeah, just go to domoregood.org, and you can start there. And then there's ways to send us messages through that. That's the easiest one to remember. I have other email addresses and stuff like that, but that's the easiest place for people to remember.
That's great. And you guys are out there on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all the different places where you would expect a world-class, advertising agency to be. And so it's really easy to find. So you're clearly doing your job well. All right. Last question I always love to ask people, and you've been so generous with your time today. I'm incredibly thankful. It's an advice question. And I ask you to go back and give yourself one piece of advice. And I'm going to ask you to go back to young Bill the day after you graduate from the University of Denver. So you've graduated from the University of Denver. If you could go back and say something to that young man, what would you say?
Well, I would say that I wish I would have gotten, 'cause I spent many years just doing secular work, right? I can honestly look back and say that's part of God's plan too, right? As much as I hate the idea that I wasted all those years doing just secular work, but I did. I learned from the best in the business, and I learned virtually everything that I wrote in Do More Good, the book, are things that I've learned in the secular market, right? And so I've just been applying those principles to the nonprofit and faith-based market. But I just wish I would have been more quick to start applying what I knew to the work of the kingdom, right? For too long, until I was 33 years old, I didn't merge the two, right? My business life was my business life. My faith life was my faith life. And it wasn't until I was 33 years old in 1994 did I combine the two. And I can tell you that when I finally combined the two, I've never felt more blessed in my entire life. I've never felt more at peace in my entire life. And so I would just encourage anybody listening to this, if you're getting tugged in two different directions, and maybe God has you on a path that's important for you to learn certain things, don't put off kingdom work. just don't put off kingdom work. I wish I would have gotten to it sooner. 33 years old sounds pretty young. Now that I'm 60, it sounds super young. But I can tell you when I was 33 years old, I already felt like an old man because I had spent so much time working my butt off very hard in secular work, right? And so that would be the advice: is get to that sooner, as soon as you can. Kingdom work is the most important work in this entire world. It's the only thing that really matters. And so the sooner you can really combine those two things, and I'm probably with your audience, I'm preaching to the choir, right? But at the same time, it is really critical that your work, regardless of what it is, should be God's work too.
Amen. Amen. That's so good. Bill, I can't thank you enough for the conversation today. It was such a joy to learn about you and your story. And I always know it's a good interview when I don't get to all the questions, and I hardly got to any of the questions that I wanted to ask, but I think we got right where God wanted us to be. So thank you so much. I deeply appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it too. Thank you very much, and bless you and what you're trying to do and bring important content for people to learn and understand and grow. And iron sharpening iron. I love that whole concept. It's always been what I love doing, and I hear that in what you're doing. So thank you for your time.
I told you guys, what a great conversation. I love the way he's looking at marketing for the church. And it's such a need. There are so many churches and movements that need a voice that will help shift it. Bill is that guy. So, hey, if you liked this episode, hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to podcasts, leave a rating and review on iTunes and now on Spotify, and be sure to share this episode with a friend. Every time you share the episode, I always get touched because it's the best way to pass the word about what God is doing on this platform. And remember, guys, if you want to follow Jesus, you must be willing to move.